Welcome to module 5. In module 5, we will go through the scope phase of life cycle assessment. In the previous two modules, we saw the LCA steps and the goal step for LCA. So, what happens in the scope? Here are the things that we do in the scoping of an LCA. We start with identifying of options to model, functional unit selection, choice of impact categories or method of impact assessment, system boundaries, and then the data quality requirements. So, we will go through each of these steps that is done during the scoping phase of a well done life cycle assessment. Identifying the options to model. This step mainly relates to a particular system or technology that you will be modeling. So, remember in the in the goal phase, we set up what is the goal of our LCA, whether it is comparison of two products, whether it is the comparison of two different materials. Then in the scoping phase, we will start with what is the system that is actually that we want to model. It could be the manufacturing of a particular material in a plant site that is given to us, or it could be the average technology that is being used in the market. So, in the scope phase, we decide which option we want to model for setting up our LCA study. It also relates to data collection, because based on the scope, which option you are going to model, you would be deciding how do you go about collecting that data. If this is an average technology, you might just want to take an average of all the data that is available there. If it is specific to a site, you might want to go and collect the specific data from the site. Most of the times, the data from specific sites are not available. In those cases, we resort to modeling the data itself by knowing about the technology that is being used at that site, and that becomes very cumbersome. However, the scoping phase tells us which of the options are readily available for us to study in our LCA. For example, if you are studying electric car being made in the US versus Europe, your model that you would be developing, the technology that you might be using will be very different. Similarly, if you are going to use a paper cup that is made in Oregon versus California, which are two different states, or paper cup made in Kolkata versus Chennai, that would be also very different. So, based on your scoping, you would tell this LCA has a certain intended goal, and it is the option where it is being manufactured that you are modeling. Hence, your scoping, the first step of identifying the options that you are modeling, is very directly related to the goal of the study. If your goal of the study is not to study the national average, then you are not going to use the national averaging option. The next step, which is a very critical step in your LCA, is functional unit selection. We will go into detail of what the functional unit selection means, and then we will see certain examples of functional unit selection. Functional unit. The functional unit in an LCA corresponds to a reference flow to which all other model flows of the system are related. In most cases, the functional unit is related to our final product. Why are we not saying a particular unit of product, but we are saying functional unit? The functional unit will be dependent on the goal of the study, and in the initial flow chart, it should be mentioned which flow will be your reference flow. So, when we made the paper cup LCA system boundary, our output was 1 paper cup. So, in that case, we could say that our functional unit is 1 paper cup, but that will not be completely right. We will see why it is not completely right that the functional unit is 1 paper cup based on the goal of the study. It is definitely related to the goal of the study. If you are comparing two different paper cups and they have equal amount of usage, you can say that your functional unit is 1 paper cup. But if they do not have equal amount of usage, you will not be able to say that 1 paper cup is equivalent to another 1 paper cup, and we will see an example. So, why is it called functional unit? and not just the quantity of product. And the reason is that when we are defining a LCA, we are mostly interested in actual function of the product and not just the product, because we are thinking of substituting that product by something else or substituting the material with something else. So, the functionality of the product becomes an important aspect of doing an LCA that gives us a valid decision making answer whether to replace that product with other product or not. So, I will show an example and it will become clear. So, let us say the goal of my LCA in a comparative LCA is that is product A better than product B. And some examples of two products could be paper cup versus ceramic cup, it could be cloth bag versus plastic bag, plastic chair versus wooden chair, and diesel car versus electric car. So, whenever you are doing this comparative LCA, the functional unit is selected for equivalent amount of function to be derived from both products being compared. It is not just the product substitution, but the functionality of the product that is being substituted when we are doing these kind of comparative analysis. Hence, in comparative LCA, when we are deciding about functional unit, we need to think about the functionality of the product that is being displaced. So, some of the examples of functional unit selection, let us say for paper cup versus ceramic cup, the function of the cups is used for drinking. So, when we are thinking of drinking, we can say the number of times we will use this product throughout its lifetime. Ceramic cup may be lasting much longer. So, for ceramic cup, we are going to use that one ceramic cup for n number of times. It could be 100, it could be 200, if it breaks, it's going to be 50. So, it is definitely variable, but let us say we assume an average usage of n number of time. While paper cup is a disposable cup, so you are going to use it only for one time. The equivalence of function in this case then would be one paper cup is equivalent to 1 by n ceramic cups, which does not make sense, but if when we are thinking about comparing whether we want to use ceramic cup versus paper cup, we really need to think of the whole lifetime of the ceramic cup. Hence, we are going to equate the impact of 1 by n ceramic cup to one paper cup when we are making the decision to substitute paper cup by ceramic cup. Then we have diesel car versus electric car. Of course, in general, consumers may think that we can just replace one diesel car by another electric car, but that is not right in a comparative LCA. What we do instead is our function of the car is actual driving, it is transportation. So, it is the number of kilometers or miles traveled that is actually the unit of driving. So, if I am using my diesel car for 100 kilometers and I am using my electric car for 100 kilometers, the impact is then compared to actually show which one is better in terms of environmental impact. So, my comparison basis for substituting my diesel car with an electric car is not one car versus another car, it is actually the number of miles traveled, or we can say per mile traveled. So, most of the LCA studies, if you see for transportation substitution of this kind of diesel car versus electric car, it will actually be based on per miles traveled or per kilometer traveled, because you are substituting the function of driving from one car to another car. With this understanding, let us quickly do, I would ask you all to just take 30 seconds and think about the functional unit for following products and services, and write down that if you had to do an LCA for these, what would be your functional unit for these three different services or products. So, let us think about the answers. Our first LCA product or service was people transportation. So when we think about people transportation, let's think of railway metro. It could be the Delhi metro or Bombay metro or Chennai metro, and it is not the number of trips or the number of traveler or the number of trains that are running, but it is actually how many people are using and how many miles they are traveling. So what we call that as number of people miles, because the functionality of the public transportation is to transport people. So it should not be just how many people or how many number of trips are being made, but it is actually the miles traveled. So it is person times miles. So if we have 100 people who are traveling an average of 5 miles or 5 kilometer, then it would be your functional unit is perhaps 500 kilometer. So if you are going a 500 kilometer person, so if you want to compare your public transportation with car, then you will need to have that many trips or number of people traveling in car as well for the same amount of distance, and you would be doing your LCA based on that functionality for car. The next is light bulbs. So light bulbs, we all know, we all use in our houses. It's not actually how many light bulbs, but it is if we are using some number of light bulbs, then how many light days are provided. So if I am going to use a bulb for 100 days versus I am going to use a bulb for 50 days, then when we do the equivalence or compare, so we will use actual amount of number of days. We can also use the luminosity or the lumens, number of lumens provided, which becomes even more technical. If you are that cautious about whether you want to use a 40 watt versus a 60 watt, then you have to understand how many lumens are provided by the bulb for the total number of light days that it is providing. So you can change the functional unit based on the functionality that you are focused on for making a decision on substituting your product with another product. The last one is easy. We have waste management options for discarded cardboard boxes from a large furniture store, and of course the functionality of the waste management option is to throw away the number of waste boxes. So here it's very straightforward. It will be the number of waste boxes recycled that is going to be the functionality of the waste management option. So it could be the number of waste boxes that are recycled, number of waste boxes that are incinerated. So you will take that total number of boxes that are being thrown away as your functional unit. I hope this clarifies how do you select a functional unit, and as you go further in the course and you see more examples on LCA studies, it will become even more clearer how to select a functional unit. Remember, doing a good LCA starts with selecting the right functional unit when you have to make a decision about substitution of different products. Also, selection of your functional unit helps you decide how do you collect the data. Next thing in the scoping of our LCA is choice of impact categories and method of impact assessment. When we go to the life cycle impact assessment step, we will definitely get into much more detail about these things, but here I will just give a quick overview of what this step entails. So, impact categories, most of the time when we select data, which you can see is LCI results, which is life cycle inventory, it gets transferred into midpoint categories and then the area of production which are known as endpoint categories. So, the midpoint categories can be related to natural resource depletion, which could be fossil fuel depletion, it could be environmental degradation such as air, water and ecological systems, and also human health hazard. So, our area of protection that we see, the 3 endpoint, is we are protecting human health, we are protecting natural environment, but we are also protecting natural resources. So, based on your scope, whether your goal of the LCA is focused on human health protection, natural environment protection or natural resources protection, the kind of data that you will collect is going to be different. So, your choice of impact categories or choice of your endpoint category for your LCA drives the level of data collection in your second step of LCA, which is the life cycle inventory result. So, if your goal of the LCA is different, Based on that, your midpoint category indicator and area of protection could be different, and hence your focus on data collection would be different. Data collection is a costly process. It requires sometimes privacy issues, sometimes collaborations and NDAs. So, here it is very important to be very cautious of that, how we are scoping to understand what data we need to collect. If you are not very cautious about it, you might be collecting extraneous data, which is okay to have if the data comes for free, but if it is costly to collect data, then it is important to judiciously make the decision of which data you want to collect for your LCA. A general rule of thumb that we use in LCA is that we do not throw away data till the last phase of LCAs to ensure that we have met the intended goal. But defining the impact categories you want to focus in the goal and scope phase helps in focusing efforts to collect more data in LCI phase related to the selected impact categories. Of course, this step helps us to know what are we going to do in the next step. In like any modeling methods, here also if we have done our work well in this step, it will improve the cost efficiency down the stream for data collection. Some of the impact categories are non-renewable resource requirements, energy, water, footprints, carbon, nitrogen, ecological, and we will definitely go through the theory of carbon footprinting, nitrogen, ecological footprinting, and also we will cover list of detailed impact categories in life cycle impact assessment step. So, I am going to show some of the examples for choice of selection of impact categories. Let's say the goal of my LCA study is to choosing a product that reduces reliance on fossil fuel or studying the life cycle consumption of fossil fuel. In this case, the scoping phase will first start with choosing the functional unit of the product. It could be 1 unit of or 1 kilojoule of energy, because we are talking about energy, fossil fuel. We choose the boundary considering the time and geographic criteria. But our impact category, since the goal is to really look into the fossil fuel depletion, our impact category will be fossil fuel depletion or resource depletion. Hence, when we collect data, we will be very cautious of collecting all the data wherever we are using non-renewable energy resources such as coal or oil and gas. So, the next example is choice of selection of impact categories. So, here let us say the goal is choosing a product to reformulate for reducing potential cancer effect. So, see, the important term here is that the goal is to reduce potential cancer effect in the product. So, of course, you will start with choosing the functional unit of your product, which is 1 unit. You can choose the boundary considering the time and geographic criteria, but here now the impact category would be human carcinogenic effect. So, when we collect data on the LCI in the LCI step, we will be very focused on looking for emissions and any relevant data that relates to the human carcinogenic effect. So, let us do a quick thinking activity. Here I have provided you goals for different types of LCA. So, different LCA. So, these are different goals. What I want you to do is think about the impact category that would be important as in the scoping phase, and what is the data of main interest that will address that particular impact category. So, let us go through the answers. The first one, the first LCA goal is product reformulation with a new ingredient to meet the water quality standards. Here you can see that the focus is on water quality standards. So, our impact category is definitely natural environment protection. So, in that case we are interested in acidification and eutrophication. So, the impact category we can look at as acidification. or eutrophication. When we go through the life cycle impact assessment steps, I will go through more detail into these impact categories. So, here the data of main interest would be then water emissions, that is related to the product manufacturing, and the water emissions could be related to the nitrogen emissions or any other toxic chemicals. In the second one, we have reducing the overall climate impact of product use. Again, we are interested in the protection of natural environment, and here we have the climate change or ozone depletion as one of the main impact category that we will focus. So, here when we do the scoping of our LCA, our focus on impact category will be climate change, which is related to the global warming potential, and the ozone depletion. The next goal is changing the manufacturing process to reduce behavioral impacts on population. So, this is a very important challenge that lot of time we do not account for the impact of manufacturing process on workers who are working in the factory, and that definitely affects them. So, here we are actually concerned about the human health impact of making that product. So, in that case we can think about let us say respiratory inorganics, so anything that is related to human health. And so, here our impact category could be, let us say, human toxicity, because that also affects the behavioral response, and maybe respiratory inorganics. And the data of main interest would be emissions in the factory. The last one is identifying ways to reduce impact on aquatic ecosystem because of a product use or manufacturing. In this case, we are thinking about natural environment protection, and we can again think of the same thing as ecotoxicity, acidification or eutrophication. So, we could think of ecotoxicity. Ecotoxicity is something that relates the impact of emissions onto the aquatic life or marine life. So, we can talk about emissions to the water systems. So, you can see that based on the goal of our LCA, we are able to scope out the importance of impact categories, or which impact categories are important for your study, and based on that we can think of what is the data of main interest that we need to collect for the particular LCA to meet the goal of the intended LCA study. So, for climate change we also have air emissions. So, that is another data. With that, we will move into the next few options for scoping, which is the system boundary. System boundary selection and systematic system boundary selection is a very critical step in setting up your LCA. So, in the next module, we will start getting into more details of systematic selection of system boundary for your LCA.